So I've been speaking, or at least engaged in a comment exchange online with some of the frequenters of P.Z. Myers' blog um, called Pharyngula. Myers is a biologist, um, a developmental biologist, and a prominent internet atheist. And I think we must put the type of thinking that Myers does in the context of the media ecology in which it survives and um, and lives. And there does seem to be an interesting connection between the internet and blogging um, and commenting in particular and atheism. The sort of individualized, modest witnessing, to use one of Donna Haraway's terms. It might be Bruno Latour, actually. Both sociologists of science who try to look at science as a cultural, but also cultural activity. But they also try to break down this difference or dichotomy assumed by many sort of atheistic materialists to exist between nature and culture. So when one tries to do sociology of science, they try to look at, um, in a sense, the scientist as uh, a natural phenomenon. But part of what you have to take into consideration when you look at the scientist from a sociological or an anthropological perspective is their own reflective and theoretical capacities. So unlike the nature that science thinks it's studying, which is devoid of any thinking, any consciousness, any intelligence, the anthropologist of science, the sociologist of science, has to, in its conception of a natural phenomenon, um, when dealing with the scientist, recognize that thinking is in nature, that nature does think, that the scientist themselves is the chief exemplar of the intelligence of the universe. So most, the basic paradigm for science is materialism, right? The idea that all that exists are mechanical and so geometrically and mathematically sort of modelable, uh, and that it is deterministic, basically. That if we have the right equation, the right function, the right algorithm, we can predict, uh, at least statistically, what will happen. It seems that with quantum physics, and even before quantum physics, with thermodynamics, the notion of probability and statistical averaging um, became more prominent. And the Newtonian world conception of a deterministic, um, a classically deterministic universe broke down. With quantum physics, there's still determinism, but it's determinism within certain statistical um, fields of probability. Quantum physics would say that at any given moment, what we conceive of as one electron could be anywhere in the universe, but it's most likely where it's supposed to be given its relationship to all the other electrons. So, it's a very um, strange conception of matter. So, I don't think materialism as a kind of atheistic social posture or as a worldview can really cope with a quantum materialism, um, because it isn't based on that sort of individual, um, fully mediated, modest witness, which is what is sort of provided you. You're provided that opportunity on the internet. And so, I think atheism survives today as that kind of alienated subjectivity, which views nature as a dead machine and the human as the only intelligence. Um, and of course, this has Christian roots, right? But I think the internet both allows us to take on that posture at the same time that it's the technology, the medium itself, computers, are only possible because of our technical understanding of quantum events. We're running computers because we understand how electromagnetism, how electrons move through um, circuits, right? Pathways that we provide. And it's interesting that while our technology has become quantum, our mind, for the most part, our consciousness is still living in a Newtonian world. Um, and so while I'm trying to enter into dialogue with some of the scientific materialists and atheistic materialists on P.Z. Myers's blog, um, a problem that comes up, I think, is that both myself and those who I'm in exchange with struggle to come up with the proper expression of this new um, indeterminate picture. You know, granted, most of what P.Z. Myers talks about on his blog is the way that fundamentalist religious um, people in our society and institutions in our society are having an undue and undesirable influence over state and social policy. So he's really taking a political position, but he's tying you know a political position of or a social attitude to a certain kind of science, to a materialistic science that doesn't allow you to talk rationally about spirit, even when you're a person living in society. Like, I think there's a sort of compartmentalization that goes on for most scientists, where when they're wearing their white coat and they're in the lab, there's no such thing as freedom, in terms of like agency. There's no such thing as um, spirit or consciousness active in the world in an intelligent way, right? There is only physical process. There's only anatomy. But then when they take off their lab coat and they go home to their families, they take the people that they love to be free, autonomous, responsible spirits, right? Beings that they are in a relationship of um, sort of, it's a relationship, but it's also noumenal, right, or sublime, in the sense that the being that you are dealing with, your loved one, is infinite, right? You can't predict what they're going to do next because they're self-determining, free beings, right? And of course, we talk about each other, about other persons and ourselves as being somewhat conditioned by our surroundings, and of course we are, but at the same time, um, if we don't believe that we have will, we contradict ourselves in the very act of saying it. So it's a performative contradiction. If I say, I do not have free will, the very use of this, it's not just a word, right? It's a whole attitude. It brings forth a certain way of being in the world. When you say I am, or I feel, or I have, to say that I don't have free will is to say I am free, but I refuse to believe it. Right? It's to contradict oneself. The very statement of the I must be free for the rest of the sentence to have a meaning. Right? Maybe that doesn't make any sense to you at all. And the real reason I want to make a video, or I started to talk 10 minutes ago, was to try to introduce Hegel. And of course, I tried to preface Hegel's preface to the Phenomenology of Mind, and went on for 10 minutes about the difference between uh, scientific materialism and, well, what we could call science, like with a capital S, or philosophy. And for Hegel, science as a sort of complete systematic understanding of the universe um, is what philosophy ought to strive towards. So that nowadays, in the modern, or rather the contemporary context, when this complete fragmentation of thousands and thousands of disciplines and fields and focused inquiries of scientific endeavor with their own paradigms, and that don't necessarily connect in any coherent way with all the other sciences and all the other departments. Um, you know, these for Hegel didn't really deserve the name of science. Science needs to understand the whole, the universal, the universe. Um, and say what you may about Hegel, plenty to say about him. I don't think I can agree or disagree, right? You can't just say, oh, I disagree with Hegel, or oh, I agree, because there's more going on with Hegel than a simple contradiction like that. Um, Reading Hegel is a process of self-discovery that you can't simply affirm as true or as false, right? He's trying to give an account of how truth or falsity are possible in the first place. So let's just begin reading, and I'll try to jump in and let you know what I think one might want to respond to Hegel with, or what Hegel may have been trying to say. Many have failed, so I do so at my own peril. But I'll do a part two where I read the Phenomenology. So if you're in for that, if you're down for that, then part two.